and why it is so important that we do try to prevent. 1 in 4 of us who begin using a substance before we're 18 have a potential to have an addiction in our lives. If we wait until we're over the age of 21, that risk is greatly reduced. So delay the onset of use. That is the goal, right? And just real quickly, touching on some contributors to addiction or problems with substances. Probably number one is genetics. That gives us about a 60% potential for having a substance use disorder. So if there's a family history of alcoholism, drug addiction, gambling, other process addictions, psychosocial emotional, things like a mental health diagnosis, trauma, and so on. Environmental. So what is the access to substances? Is it used in the home? uh, Friends, peers, neighborhood, environment, all of that. And again, all of this is exacerbated by the age of the onset of use. So the earlier we start, the greater our potential for problems. So taking a look at cannabis specifically, overall, anyone over the age of 12 who is using cannabis, 9% of those folks will potentially have a problem with dependence on cannabis. If we isolate 12 to 18-year-olds, that is that potential goes up 4 to 7 times. So they are 4 to 7 times a greater chance of having a problem with cannabis than somebody who is over the age of 18. And taking a look again, age of onset is so crucial. This is breaking down 12 to 17-year-olds versus 18 to 25-year-olds. So actually everybody we're looking at here, their frontal lobe is still not fully developed yet. That prefrontal cortex where executive function is not quite fully there yet, but look at the difference under 18. So somebody who's using pretty consistently in their first year, in their second year, again, this is cannabis use disorder. By the time we get to the 4th year of regular use, the 12 to 17-year-old's potential for addiction is double that of the 18 to 25-year-old. Now we're looking at a combination of cannabis with other substances. If you're smoking cigarettes, if you're binging alcohol, if you're a heavy alcohol user, or you're using other illicit drugs, the blue bars show that use alone. The orange bars show that use in combination with cannabis. So it definitely increases our potential for some of these other behaviors or other substance use. The impact on a developing brain in particular. I mean, there's a very different impact, I will say, if you have not initiated cannabis use before the age of 25, you may not see some of this, but if you are under 25, these are the impacts on that developing brain. Cognitive decline, psychosocial impairments. I won't list them all for you. You can read this for yourself. But I think amotivational syndrome is, oops, there's a typo there. Is definitely something that is a big concern, and it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy then, because your motivation to change your poor quality of life isn't there. So we often hear that somebody who has developed a dependence or an addiction to an opioid may be fully aware that they are their quality of life is not good and this is not healthy and this needs to stop. Their craving is intense, but their willingness to stop is very different than somebody who's using cannabis. That just unfortunately is not fully there. And increasing legalization is mitigating the perception of harm. So we know that as the perception of harm goes down, and as people more and more are hearing about medical, the term medical marijuana, recreational being legalized, they think it must be healthy, it must be safe. And so the use goes up, especially among young people. And we're going to talk about the fact that this is definitely not necessarily the case. Okay, just to make you aware, because some people are very confused by the fact that a loved one is throwing up uncontrollably. This might be something called cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, where we've often heard that cannabis can be used for increasing appetite and for people who have nausea, who are undergoing chemotherapy and so forth, that sometimes you equate, marijuana use with that reduction of nausea, but it can actually, in heavy use, have the opposite effect in some people. And that's this hyperemesis syndrome, where there's repeated vomiting. The only thing that seems to calm it down is a hot bath or shower. And people will show up in the ER with these symptoms and are very confused, but this is what it might very well might be. And just to take a quick look at some withdrawal symptoms, depression, anxiety, flu-like symptoms, weight changes, insomnia, and irritability. So I can tell you that when my son was using cannabis heavily and we went away for a week, he was obviously not consuming the way he had been when he wasn't together with his family, in a hotel room. He had all of these symptoms. And I can't say the weight change happened overnight, but certainly every other piece of it was there. It was not a fun vacation, if I can say, so glad that is something that he's walked away from today. So marijuana, the plant cannabis, is made up of hundreds of different chemicals. And when you dry the plant, there are hundreds more. And when you light that dried plant on fire, there are even more chemicals. The two that are most interesting to us and that we're going to be talking about today are CBD and THC. So CBD, or cannabidiol, is not psychoactive. This does not get you high. This is now in just about any kind of product under the sun these days. Dave and I are probably a lot less concerned about CBD, other than the fact that it can be very expensive and it is not regulated. The THC is what we're going to be talking a little bit more about, but I just want to point this out because I think there's a lot of confusion about these substances. And what's so interesting, and I'm going to move on to the THC slide now, in the original, the way, the plant was intended to be, the CBD and THC ratio was 1 to 1. So that is really important to note because THC is the psychoactive ingredient, and CBD actually kind of brings down the high. So when it's in that 1 to 1 natural ratio, you don't get very high at all from that dried plant when it's smoked. So that old school weed, I'm going to be showing you another slide in a moment to explain this, was much lower percentage of THC. So even if we were increasing both, the high wouldn't be as extreme as when you get the delta, when you get the change, the higher THC and the lower CBD is where you get a bigger high. So taking a look at this potency change from 1995, looking at that through 2018, the green bar is showing us CBD levels. So the CBD level has gone down to roughly, and well, this is the most recent one we have here is 2018, down to less than a percentage point. Whereas the THC, this is showing up to 15.6%. So that is just looking at the plant, the dried plant. This is not looking at concentrates. Now we're going to talk about, here's the big difference. So the green section is showing us this is all dried plant matter. So the highest potency they're able to get to now through botany is 30%. So that's THC level. When we talk about concentrates, so concentrates, and Dave can definitely explain this more in detail if you like, but concentrates are basically using a solvent like butane or other kinds of products to strip the THC from the plant. It's condensed down, it's cooked down, and which is, by the way, a very flammable and dangerous process to get these extracts, these oils. And they are in products such as edibles, but they're also things like wax and chatter. I have an image I'll show you in just a moment of those, but big difference. And young people are very attracted to these concentrates. They're in vape pens. They can be used in a lot of ways that are easy to disguise. This is a cartridge or cart, people refer to a lot of the time. And just so you know, as Camel cigarettes very famously used to target youth in their advertising with Joe Camel, that's no longer legal to use these kinds of images in appealing to youth. But, we have big tobacco is now turned into big cannabis. And we have companies like Altria and Philip Morris and some others who are heavily investing in this industry. They're backing the lobbyists that are trying to get this legalized everywhere. And what's really concerning about this is people are saying we're hearing these stories about, oh, this is going to help in minority communities with small businesses. It is not small business. This is big corporate money being poured into this. So if you want some kind of argument for say, what we could say with our kids to say like why we don't want you doing this, you are being targeted. You're being manipulated by big big money corporations. They want you to like these products. And look at these edible products. This looks like candy. It is candy with THC in it. So also very dangerous. We know that in states where it's legalized, kids are ending up in emergency departments because of this. They're accidentally getting their hands on it, thinking it's candy, and it is absolutely not. The other important thing to note about edibles is it is metabolized much more slowly than smoking it. When you smoke it, you're high almost instantly. When you're consuming an edible, because it's going through the digestive system, you might eat some and say, geez, I'm not even feeling this. So you eat more. Now you're really toxic. You're really high. So lots of concerns there. And these are just some of the images that you might see that look at this THC crystal. How was that ever a plant? These are not, this isn't Cheech and Chong. This is not, rolling a doobie. This is not that kind of stuff. This is what our kids are very drawn to right now. And it is high in potency. Some trends that we're really worried about with legalization is, again, that reduced perception of harm, the increase in potency. How do you handle drug-free workplaces? This is so challenging. How do bus drivers and truck drivers and others operating import heavy equipment, construction workers, how does this impact them? It's very difficult with law enforcement. It's very difficult there is no field test for this when you pull somebody over that appears to have been intoxicated while driving. So lots of challenges. And just to give you a glimpse of where things are in our country, the lighter green is showing states with medical marijuana, and the dark green is showing both medical and recreational. And of course, New Jersey just became legal for recreational, and I fear Pennsylvania is probably not far behind. That is the end of my PowerPoint. And while I have the screen, I will know that you wanted to hear a little bit about what new things look like. I actually have our mock teen bedroom set up for a program we're doing Tuesday night, so I thought I'd show you. This is a kind of a newer fangled pipe. This is for dabbing, and I have something here. This is actually Manuka honey. It is not dabs, but it looks very much like that product. So this is a dental implement. You might take this implement. They call this a dabber. Go in here, and I've got a little bit on the tip here. You would then take a torch like this, or a lighter, but a torch works a lot better. This is actually, I use this for creme brulee, but this can be used to heat up this end. This is called the nail. It's a quartz crystal. You can heat it up until it gets almost red hot. And then when you use this dabber, you put it on the tip of this, and then you smoke it this way. And people are walking around my office, and they're probably wondering what the heck I'm doing. But basically, this is what it looks like today. So this is a very common thing. There are also rigs and other things that look a little bit more like a bong, but the dabbing has using these concentrates is different than packing a bowl as it used to be. So I wanted to mention that. And let me take a look, Shannon, at some of the questions to see if there's anything that I left out. And please jump in if there's something you want me to touch on that I haven't mentioned.
Yeah, that was an awesome amount of information. Thank you so much. Got a couple questions from the audience, but one quick thing I'd like you to touch on are just, what are some of the myths people typically find, or at least that youth have? I know one thing I come across a lot when I teach children is that people believe because the cannabis plant is a plant, it's natural, it's fine. It's not like tobacco that has a ton of chemicals, but as we could tell from your information, that's not quite the truth.
Right. Yeah, I think the myths are, as I said, that it's healthy, that it's natural. I mean, there are plenty of things that come from the earth that aren't good for us, including asbestos and cocaine and opium. So lots of things can be natural and quite unhealthy. Sulfur isn't healthy just because it comes from the earth. So that would certainly be a myth. And it also doesn't help that we see all the marketing that comes with the cannabis industry, even CBD, even though that we know it's not an addictive substance, it's all glommed in together with it's healthful. It's, they love promoting the whole green aspect of it. And I think that another huge myth, especially with kids, is that this helps with anxiety. And there is absolutely no evidence yet that we have that THC is effective for anxiety. In fact, quite the contrary. It can lead to problems with psychosis and aggression and hallucinations and all sorts of things. And anxiety actually tends to go up. And especially if it's being used in conjunction with nicotine, then that increases your anxiety between use. So you think you need it more. So we can talk all day about vaping and how that has really complicated things. David, I wonder if you have any thoughts too about myths that are surrounding this.
Yeah, I think you covered it very well. I think myths related to cannabis, my parents smoked it, so, they turned out okay. And so I can smoke it. And, as Kim mentioned, we've seen a significant increase in THC content and the lack of the CBD in the plant over the last 15 to 20 years. Really is this window of where we've just seen exponential hybridization of the plant. So I'm 50 this year. When I was in high school in the 80s, it was 5 people smoked a joint, laughed for 15 minutes, and ended up with a wicked headache. And then maybe you did it again a month or 2 down the road. It's a completely different game now. So, as for all the reasons. So the myth of like previous generations did it, and so we should be able to do it. And the plant thing too, it's just a plant. I don't like to bash like, senators or anybody. For the most part, they do very well for the people they represent. It's just I feel like sometimes, they speak with the lack of information that would be required for them to speak from the podium that they're speaking from. And what I hear a lot is, it's a plant, it's not a drug. And as Kim so eloquently pointed out, cocaine comes from a plant, opium comes from a plant. All of our medicinal drugs originally came from plants. And all medication has a risk, has a benefit, and you have to, so yeah.
Yeah, a good leeway to our next audience question before we move into legalization landscape. A little bit of clarification needed about CBD. We have one question asking about how CBD oil is advertised to treat everything. It's available everywhere now. What are the pros and cons of that? And then a secondary question is, during a drug test, does CBD show up on that drug test, or is it THC that's being tested for?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And it is very confusing. The really important thing to know about CBD is it's not regulated. None of this is being checked by, there is no FDA approved anything regarding CBD or THC right now. There, except medications, and I should point out, they're the only plant-derived medication that we have right now that's FDA approved from the cannabis plant is Marinol, and that is for wasting syndrome for people who are undergoing chemotherapy or other disorders that really they need to increase their appetite, and that is Marinol, and that is FDA approved. But it's actually, I'm sorry, I said that wrong. That is synthetic marijuana. That is not actually derived from the plant. Epidiolex, which is derived from the plant, that is FDA approved for intractable childhood seizure disorders, not all seizure disorders, specifically Lennox-Gastaut and Dravet syndrome. And so that is, Epidiolex does come from the plant, but that is predominantly CBD. It is an oil, it is not smoked, it is consumed, and it is pure CBD. That is the only one that comes from the plant. So I think there's a lot of confusion about that. But none of the rest of that is regulated. So yes, you could be consuming something that you think is a CBD product that has traces of THC in it. And as far as the effectiveness of lotion, I have absolutely no idea. And I don't think anyone really does. Dave, you know more about CBD than I do. I don't know. It's just that there's probably a lot of potential there. It needs to be studied more. And I think it's also important to note that because cannabis is not, it is considered a Schedule I drug, our researchers, in the United States are not able to really do double-blind longitudinal studies because it's not legal. And so it's very hard to conduct these studies. So we don't have great evidence, especially of high potency cannabis. We have other international studies that have been done looking at long-term use of the plant, the dried plant form, but we have no idea what long-term use of 60, 70, 80, 90% THC is going to be doing to people long-term. I kind of went off the track a little bit there.
And then just to clarify about the testing question again, what is it that shows up in a drug test? Is it the THC, CBD, something else, a combo?
THC.
THC.
There's no CBD that shows up in a drug test, is there? Why would there be? No.
And as Kim pointed out, the FDA doesn't regulate the CBD that comes from the hemp plant. So the hemp plant is like going to be the CBD that you see at Turkey Hill and your Wawas and, like on the counter, your little gas station corner stores, because that has less than 0.05% THC in it. Whereas like the CBD that comes from the Sensimelia plant, which is either an indica or sativa, those are going to be the ones in the dispensary. Those cannot be sold over the counter because they do contain higher levels of THC. So again, that comes into a problem with drug-free employers. Yes, if it's a one-time use, it's not going to be enough to track to flag a urine drug screen. But the metabolites that are tested for are fat soluble. And so they build up. If you're a daily user of CBD from a dispensary with a low dose of THC in it, what would be undetectable for a one-time use or occasional user is going to be detectable and come up as THC because of the bioavailability buildup over. So it does, significantly affect employability. A lot of secondary impacts. We're going to see blood screening as the new standard for detection of impairment rather than it being in metabolites being in your body, in your urine, because blood shows impairment, urine does not. And those are quite significantly more costly. And if we have to readapt everything, we're going to see utilities, and as Kim mentioned, bus drivers, transportation, SEPTA. These organizations have the legal ability to pass their operating costs on to their consumers. So as this continues, liability, testing, all of the training, the education that incurs costs at those organizations are going to be passed on to us. So we're going to see utility increases. We're going to see transportation cost increases. So it's not a win.
Very good
Sorry.
point. No,
I went off on a tangent too, Kim.
Thank you.
We tend to do it. And I want to throw in one other myth. Yeah, and Dave just touched on it, that this is going to be a cash cow for the state.
Yeah.
Not.
What did they estimate, Kim? $1 billion a year? Is
Yeah.
that what they're? Yeah, but when we look at the actual cost,
Doesn't happen.
Yeah.
No, it has not been successful in any other state.
no, it has not.
And
And
if you
awesome.
if you tax it too high, as they did in California, then the illicit industry goes through the roof because you just keep getting it on the black market.
That's a great point and a good transition into legalization. Before we do, I want to say that Kim's slides are available and she's going to send them to me. So if you're interested in a copy of those slides, send me an email and I will send them over to you. Put my email in the chat for anyone who's interested. And Dave, please take us away about legalization. How close is PA to recreational legalization? How did, especially in Philadelphia, the decriminalization, how does that affect youth use of cannabis, youth interpretations of cannabis? And let's see, what kinds of effects have legalization had on youth in other states?
All right. We'll start with the how close is PA? How about that?
Sounds
'Cause
good.
I'm not sure if I can keep track of all the other ones there. You know, a year or two ago, Frankel and Marshall, I think I'm pronouncing that right, college had a poll, and we were right around 59 or 60% of the voting population are in favor of full legalization. What's the difference between legalization and decriminalization? Decriminalization just simply means that there's not going to be a pursuit of criminal charges on anybody who is found in possession of small amounts of cannabis. It's often written up like a traffic ticket. Does that mean it's not on your record? It's similar to a traffic ticket, so it would show up on background, but it would be a summary offense. All right. It's not going to render you incapable of employment, whereas a misdemeanor or a felony will absolutely, because those are criminal charges. So decriminalization really is able to skirt the social justice issue. It's able to address that issue and skirt full recreational legalization, because now the law officers of the law now have discretion. They can choose, because it can either be written up as a summary offense or it can be disregarded altogether. And most of the law enforcement that I interact with, unless the person is impaired and is in a situation where they are going to harm themselves or others, they are essentially choosing their battle. All right. So if it is since it's been decriminalized in Philadelphia, you don't see much enforcement of it unless it's dealing that is enforced. But simple possession is done. All right. So realistically, the social justice issue could be addressed there. Unfortunately, we have many individuals who are pushing for full legalization, or the tax dollar that Kim identified is counterproductive. We're not going to take in enough cash to cover the costs, the secondary impacts, as we call them, associated with an increase in use and access and everything from DUIs, because we're going to have to enforce this. It's going to be another alcohol. We have Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman. Great guy. I like him. He does a lot for people. He's always been kind of a grassroots kind of guy, fighting for the underdog. He's pushing for full recreational legalization, and I respect his opinion on it. But when somebody of his stature, says things like it's not a drug, it's a plant, I feel like that's just unfortunately misinformation. I would love to have the opportunity to sit down with John and have a discussion. Like I said, I think he does a great job. It's just I think a lot of the individuals who are in charge of making the laws don't fully understand the potential of harm that exists with this. How close are we in PA? I would give it a year. Honestly, Governor Wolf has already said that he'll sign it if it comes across his state, if it ends up a voting, to be voted on, with 60% or more people in support, it's going to pass. It's already passed in New Jersey. They're in the process of setting up their recreational dispensaries. New York is now going to vote on it, and more than likely it will pass in New York State as well. And so PA is, we're kind of, up against the wall. It would, if we don't pass it, it would resemble alcohol drinking age of the early 80s, where it was, 21 in, PA and 18 in New Jersey. And there was, I think that's how, and there was that cross-border issues. So typically states kind of spread out, and the legalization occurs in that way. And as Kim identified, the black market is going to continue to thrive, because we're looking at 10 to 13% taxes. Medical is going to be taxed less, recreational is going to be taxed more, and that opens up a lot of opportunity for black market for undercutting competition. And if you're a young person, young adult, and you have $20, do you buy a gram off of a dispensary, or do you get 2 grams from the black market? So that's what it comes down to. We're recreational, as I like to call it, adult use. Keep on saying recreational, but it really should be adult use. It's coming. I think it's unavoidable at this point. Recently, I can't think of the 2 senators who just Sherry Street and Diane Lawlin introduced a bill back in February, and that's where the billion came from, I think, right, Kim? I think they're the ones who said, an expected $1 billion tax fall from this. So, yeah, we're close.
Well, then moving forward with that idea, could you give us some insight as to how legalization in other states have affected use among youth, among the kids? I know it's probably something we all know, but worth saying out loud how this might affect Pennsylvania youth in the next few years.
Yeah, so, this is all data gathered through things like, youth surveys and monitoring the future and self-report. So you can take it with a grain of salt. There hasn't been a tremendous spike in use amongst youth. We're talking a couple percentile, and it is this up and down. But what we have seen a large increase in states where it's become recreationally legal or adult use legal, or both, medicinal and or recreational, is a spike in vaping cannabis use. That is the one that's spiked significantly. Everybody likes to focus on, have you used marijuana in the last 30 days? But that one has remained steady. And in some states it's dropped for a year and then come back up. But if you look at the vaping data on the youth surveys and the monitoring the futures, and you see the nicotine use, which is correlated to other substance use. And when the questions arise, have you used marijuana in a vape device? That's where the numbers go, because the youth see that, hey, I don't smoke marijuana. I'm vaping, some butter or some wax or shatter or, hash oil. And so the data's out there. We're just not acquiring it as right now in an efficient manner. And we shouldn't be looking at just youth use as the barometer for whether or not it should be legal. We should be looking at parental use. We should be looking at community impacts. We should be looking at a lot of these things that impact the development of our youth and set a stage for, going back to, developmental theorists like Yuri Bronfenbrenner and the ecological model, what is that child's microsystem and mesosystems and communities going to look like? Is it a pro-social, healthy? Everybody's probably familiar with the 40 assets. Do they possess these things? Or is it a less than healthy, less than ideal setting? Because, parental use of drugs, no matter what the drug, is not beneficial for a child. It's just not.
Absolutely. It seems we really need to be asking different questions then as legalization goes forward, asking different questions for the youth, because it's going to change how they interact with cannabis in the future.
Yeah. And I mean, hey, I'm all for, from my generation, if an individual was caught with marijuana, they told you to dump it out, get out of here. Nobody was getting misdemeanors, offenses in the 70s and 80s. Nobody was getting arrested for it. Unless you were of a certain ethnicity and you lived in a certain socioeconomic bracket. And so this is that social justice area. But, that's where decriminalization could come into play. And so, just to bring that up.
Awesome. Thank you. And one last question in legalization. I actually would like to combine my question and a question we got from the audience. An audience member would like to know, is there any work addressing the ambiguity in federal legislation related to Delta 8? I'd love some context for that too, because I don't know what Delta 8 is. And then going further, also asking about any other policies that might be actively working at the same time as these bills to legalize, to protect or to prevent misuse.
There's not a lot of verbiage. I mean, there is some, funneling of the tax money into prevention programs in schools and things like that. But again, it's not going to be enough to cover the true impact once this takes hold. Regarding, the Delta 8, what that is that's called tetrahydrocannabinol, Delta 8 hydrocannabinol. And it's the lesser known euphoric cannabinoid. Delta 9 is the kind of the famous one. Delta 8 is kind of its little brother and has still a significant psychoactive effect, but not quite as significant as Delta 9. And so this is another way to skirt regulatory content of, products of containing, Delta 9 hydrocannabinol number 9. There's bills that are being submitted that have lots of lines in them that we should be reading, one of which is microgrows. Previous bill, HB 350 here in PA, had a microgrow verbiage. I think it was page 15. I think if you pull up that bill, I think it was page 15, if I remember correctly. And it had microgrow as you can grow in your home, residential home, in your privately owned home, and you can have up to 150 plants at one time being grown. And you can only sell these to dispensaries. You cannot use it yourself. You cannot gift it. You cannot give it away. You can't use any of it. I don't think people truly understand what 150 plants look like, or the profitability of this, and the fact that it takes about 3 months to go from seed to harvest. So there's 12 months in a year. If you do the math, it's 12 times divided by 3, you get 4 grow cycles in a year at 150 plants. Each plant will harvest 3 to 5 ounces. Each ounce is able to be sold to a dispensary at discounted rate at around $250. So you do the math. Somebody could buy a very nice, large $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 home in an upscale neighborhood, and in the first year pay for at least half of that house from their harvest. But it would basically require every room of that house to be filled with marijuana plants. You're not going to make money just growing small scale. So what we're going to see is communities with the individuals who don't have the community's intentions at hand. When we purchase a home, we look for the community that shares our interests, our concern for the young people. We want that block that the kids can play on. This is going to open up a very challenging situation. From working with enforcement with the FDA in the past, I can tell you we will not have enough hands on deck to oversee this or regulate it in any shape or form. So micro grows, anytime you see a micro grow, home grow allowance in a bill, I would be very afraid.
Yeah, there's a lot of fine print, it seems, in these different bills that are coming through.
Yes.
All right, good to think about, good to ask about. Awesome. Any last legalization questions before we move on? Feel free to either unmute or write it in the chat. Right, I do have one question I forgot to ask at the start, and that is why cannabis? Why cannabis and not marijuana or weed or pot or any of these other devil's lettuce things we might be hearing? Why cannabis?
Devil's
I haven't heard
lettuce.
that one before. Devil's
Oh,
lettuce.
yeah.
Got that from an 8th grader last year.
Yeah, somebody got that from the Boston area, eh? Yeah. Cannabis is the scientific name, covers every aspect of the plant. That's about it. That's why I call it cannabis. That's why I refer to it as cannabis. There's also, the Harry, never pronounce his last name. Help me out here, Kim. Slazenger from the 30s, and the war on drugs, marijuana tax stamp, reefer madness. There was absolutely, marijuana was, there was some racist undertones associated with using that term to associate it with, ethnicity and, xenophobia, xenophobe and all that stuff. So I prefer not to use it just because of the history associated with it, but also because, the scientific name is cannabis.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's unfortunate that many of our government agencies have taken upon the name marijuana, medical marijuana, all of that, because as Dave said, yeah, there's definitely some racial undertones there. That is a Spanish word. It's Mexican. It actually came from Mexico, and it's just not. I consider it kind of pejorative, so yeah, that's the name of the plant. But the nicknames, I can tell you that, when my son went off to treatment for drug addiction, his phone had the word tree, shag, all that kind of stuff. And so I think it's just always been a way for like trying to come up with the next best way to conceal what I'm doing, so it just keeps getting these different names. But of course we catch on to it. So then there has to be another one and another one. So it's like anything.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification there. All right, next question for the both of you then. How does cannabis affect a growing brain and body? Couple different ways that would be easy to relay to someone's kids or a classroom. What does it affect in a developing brain and body?
Kim, you want first dibs on this one?
Sure. I think that slide that I was showing that, talked about the amotivational, let me just say this too. And this actually came from one of our presenters, Patrick Dowling, who works with a lot of young people on this. And he said, the biggest problem with cannabis is that it works. It works if you're feeling anxious. It works if your parents are fighting and you don't want to deal with it. It works if you're stressed about school. It's not sustainable, and it will not help you in the long run. You might as well be talking about you taking a shot of vodka. Sure, you'll get into that social situation a lot more easily. Not everybody, but some people will find it very helpful. But is this good for us? And I think that what's so challenging about any substance use or this thing or just about anything that takes us away from our problems is we're not dealing with what's inside. And for a young person to start that process so early in life when their brain is still that wet cement, not fully formed yet, to introduce a substance that definitely will help them feel, again, not everybody responds the same way. Some people try this and they're like, that's it. That's what I needed. That helps. My world just got a lot rosier. That is not sustainable. So I think that is a huge way that it impacts our kids, but it can be sleep patterns changing. It can be, and again, especially with the higher potency stuff with heavy use, aggression, paranoia, all of that. I'm on the phone weekly with parents who are dealing with an under 18 or under 25-year-old who has become threatening. They're actually fearful to be in their presence. Sibling attacking sibling, lots of really scary stuff happening. And this is all thanks to heavy use of cannabis. So, it can be pretty extreme, but it can, in the earlier stages, I would think it would be a lot more of just apathy, lethargy, that amotivational, maybe the grades fall, maybe they don't, some people can be pretty functional for a good stretch of time. And then by the time the fallout occurs, now they're really down the rabbit hole and they've really become kind of consumed with it. Dave, do you have anything like that?
You nailed it. Yeah. We have a feedback loop in the brain, prefrontal cortex decision-making, hippocampus emotional memory, amygdala, fear factor, and then our dopamine production. And so this brain has to communicate through all those areas of the brain. Every time you're faced with a decision, your prefrontal cortex accesses emotional memory and sees if there's a positive emotion associated with it. If there's not, typically it won't move forward with that decision. But if there is, then it accesses the fear department. And if there's no consequences, then more than likely you're going to go through with it as long as there's a response there. And with lower perceived level of harm associated with marijuana, we're seeing less and less, or I should say fewer and fewer parents, coming down on their kids experimenting with cannabis because they're like, well, at least it isn't alcohol, at least it isn't cocaine. It's just pot. Everything I've read about it is it's harmless. And so what these kids are experiencing is their brain is experiencing a feedback loop of things that require and reinforcing and leaning towards, as Tim said, apathy, which requires, no skill, no effort, moderate to high reward. And the brain looks for the path of least resistance. So if kids put forth skill and effort and, they go through that feedback loop and they're consistently putting forth skill and effort, they're getting natural little levels of dopamine, which range from anywhere from like 5 to 25% increase in dopamine in the synapse in the brain. But once they try marijuana, we're talking 100 to 150% increase in dopamine in those synapses. So the brain learns very quickly that like, oh, I'm not just going to feel good from doing this. I'm going to feel really good. And so it works. It works. And what we've seen, time and time again, I was in counseling, I provided counseling services for the first half of my career in this field. And young kids who had a skill set, engaged, active hobbies, passions over a period of 2 to 3 years, they did less and less of those things and more of those antisocial, unhealthy, low skill, low effort, high reward behaviors, which primarily was cannabis use. So it lays a foundation for that feedback loop, look for things require no skill, no effort, and high reward. And that sets that individual up for future drug use in their adult years. And, that's where that like gateway drug term came from. It's not like if you smoke weed, you're going to move on to other things. It just kind of primes the brain for that behavior.
Yeah, thank you so much. Definitely emotional, mental, and physical effects. And for any growing brain or body, we need to be making sure that they're getting as much good nourishment as they can so they have the potential, right? Set them up for success. Good. I actually didn't have this as a question, but I'd like to touch a little bit on that idea of a gateway drug. How has that changed from the way that was perceived in the past? Marijuana is the biggest gateway drug. What is the concept of that looking like these days?
I can comment on that. We had a program a few weeks ago, and I think I heard the best response to this ever. It was this young woman who is in recovery from a cannabis use disorder. She's 24, 25 years old. And when somebody asked that question, she said, getting high can be a gateway to getting high. And I thought that just summed it all up so beautifully. And I really do think that anything that a young person, again, because that is where the potential for lifelong problems begins, is in youth, that when all of that is not fully formed yet, as Dave said about the firing of those synapses, anything can almost be a gateway. Nicotine can be a huge gateway. Alcohol, anything can be. It's what's not working anymore. It's like if this is what I'm turning to as an unhealthy coping mechanism, to deal with my pain or whatever. If I'm using it and I'm using it and it's not giving me the same effect, I'm going to use something more powerful. People are going from vaping to tobacco cigarettes. That makes no sense to somebody who understands the medical implications of that. But to them, they want more throat feel and all that kind of stuff, So anything that is not doing it for you anymore, and you want a deeper kind of high or reaction, I think it's just unfortunate the word gateway has become so demonized, sort of, but I don't know. Dave, you have thoughts about that?
I think you nailed it. I think it's, I think that person who said, it's a get high to get high, I like to look at it as a drug of association. You hang out with a group of 12 people and, somebody brings a joint into it. There's going to be some kids who stick around and smoke it. And some are going to bail and be like, yeah, nah, I'm good. My mom or dad would kill me, or they'd be disappointed in me. Disappointed in me means a lot more than kill. Because, if you instill that, trust in those bonds and those healthy relationships, clear boundaries, all that stuff, and pride in the kids through positive, parental recognition, then, they're not going to be afraid of you being angry at them. They're going to be afraid of you being disappointed in them. So there's going to be some kids who say, yeah, I'm out later. And you might be left with 8 kids in that group out of 12 who say, all right, let's burn this. And they try it and they do it occasionally. And then somebody brings in, another drug, and half of those kids are like, nope, I drew the line at marijuana. I'm out. Now you have a group of 2 or 3 kids. And then somebody else, and out of those, those 3 or 4 kids who are left, bring in a harder drug. And that leaves 2 kids there. So it's like kind of one of those. It's more of who are you hanging out with? What are you exposed to?
I just thought of another piece of that too, is that, keep in mind that cannabis is still, recreationally at least, is still illegal in this state, and it certainly is illegal for under 21-year-olds. So if they're using it, they have a dealer. They have somebody who has access probably to other illicit substances. So just the fact that, alcohol, pretty likely you can get it from your parents' house or someplace like that, or an older sibling, not necessarily with cannabis. You probably have somebody who you're getting it from illegally, who has access to other things. So I think in that way, it has a unique gateway aspect, if you want to look at it that way.
Yeah.
Oh, Shannon,
I am. Thank you. Thank you so much for clarifying that. Yeah, and I mean, definitely from a harm reductionist standpoint, trauma or pain shift, that's the gateway. The getting high to getting high is definitely a good way to look at it. Good. And then my last 2 questions are things we've touched on, but just in summary, what is the best way a parent or guardian can empower their kids to avoid cannabis, to make these good choices? And Kim, I know this is your life's work, so I'll ask you to start that off.
God, I wish I had the silver bullet for this one. I've asked my son, what could I have said, done, modeled, whatever. And the best he can offer me is, and because we were very open to hearing any problems, obviously, that our children had. But the challenge is he doesn't want to talk to me about, gee, I'm getting high a lot, and it really did fly under the radar. I worked from home. I was the Kool-Aid mom. His dad's a physician, for heaven's sake. We knew nothing. I told you he started at 13. We knew nothing until he was 18. 18. By that time, he was selling LSD in his high school. I mean, and I'm not a clueless person. So I think that, what I would really say too is preventatively as a parent, I wish we had taken opportunities, even when there's a celebrity who has a very public falling from grace kind of thing, to never use negative language about, oh, what a train wreck, what a, and that kind of stuff. Like, just to say, like, wow, I sure hope Lindsay Lohan or whoever gets some loving support from her family, because she clearly, is struggling. And I went in then to ask questions like, why do you think people like to get high? And would you want to try that? Or why would you? And what could you do instead, to kind of foster those healthy choices, and modeling it, and like saying, God, I've been on my computer all day. I'm so stressed out. Do you want to go take a walk with me? Just planting those seeds of healthy choices from really early on. God, if all of us knew how to meditate from by the time we were in grade school, I think we'd all be a lot better off. We know that being outside helps so much. We just had a program Tuesday night where our therapist talked about the fact that so many of the coping skills that she wants to give young people aren't there right now with because of the pandemic. We've missed a lot of connection, but just finding any way possible to connect with people that you're safe being with, with masks or whatever, is so important. So I think modeling it, really healthy foundation of language around it is important. Dave?
Yeah,
And-
A plus. I don't, on top of that, I guess, just clear boundaries, expectations, contract.
Mhm.
Yeah, I like talking about slang here. Just, hey, if you ever, if you ever find yourself in a situation, you can always call me, and I'll come, no questions asked, and grab you, and we can talk about, Sunday's game or something. Have the outs for them, give them outs in situations that may be uncomfortable for them. And then, link them up with as many pro-social healthy activities, healthy experimentation to see where their skill sets lie and where their natural rewards are produced. Because if if we don't do that for them, other people are gonna, do it. And so, I think all those things that Kim said are right on. And role modeling, role modeling. Do I imbibe? Do I have a glass of wine on occasion? Yeah, my wife and I, we have dinners or whatnot where we might have a glass of wine. I don't get drunk. When weed becomes legal, I'm not going to smoke the devil's lettuce. I had to throw that out there. I love that. I haven't heard that in years. I'm not going to use cannabis. Why? Because A, it's not important, and I've got a little guy, who's looking up to me, and I'm still sort of cool to him, so. But that's what I always tell young people whenever I talk to groups of, like high school seniors or juniors who are like, we're almost adults. I'm like, I challenge you guys. I challenge you to be a healthy role model to the little guys down in elementary school. I challenge you to be a role model to your little brothers and little sisters. And think about how you look when you're hanging out at Starbucks, hitting the cart outside and thinking that nobody knows that it's really weed in your jewel pod and you're just hitting away. And, sometimes I see faces like, so, it's really encouraging the youth to be role models too.
Absolutely. Awesome.
Empowering them.
Thank you. Yeah, empowering them, definitely. And obviously having the conversation, right? Talking to your kids, not ignoring the subject because they're going to learn somewhere, right?
Yeah, right.
Further, for those of us who don't have kids but interact with youth, how can prevention specialists prepare for the future, or what kinds of things can we be keeping in mind for this new cannabis world?
That's your wheelhouse, Dave. You go on that one.
Don't bash, scare tactics don't work. Encourage healthy pro-social activities instead of, saying, don't hang around with the losers, reword your language, and I don't think anybody who smokes weed is a loser, but unfortunately that's the terminology that we use, or not we, but some people use, flip it, instead of lecturing, encourage, surround yourself with positive people, surround yourself with positive things, and most importantly, have fun. Right? Like lots of fun. I want you all to have fun, but healthy, pro-social fun that you'll be proud of, fun that you'll be able to tell your kids about, fun that your parents will, say good job at, fun that little kids will look up to you for, and so spin it. We're going to have to learn how to spin prevention a little. I'm a, certified prevention specialist. I would like really, them to kind of change that antiquated language now. I would like it to be more, a certified health promotion specialist, because really prevention is about promoting health and wellness. We want people to be, bucket fillers, not bucket dippers. Anybody who knows fill in the bucket, is that language? Are you guys familiar with that? So yeah, I think prevention is going to have to adapt, and we're going to have to change the way we do things a little, which is cool. Because change is good.
Awesome. Thanks. Kim, any follow-up there?
No, he's got it. That was great. And I would also just say one other thing about, you touched on a little bit earlier, was with really young kids, role playing is a great way to do that get out that he talked about, like the way to get out of a situation, just because that's experiential learning, right? Just to sit there with someone and say, okay, I'm gonna be the friend who's you're at my house, and I'm going to offer you something. What would you say? Just to kind of that way it's kind of getting ingrained, exactly practicing it. What would you say in this situation? Just another little thing that popped in my head.
Definitely.
Yes. Suggest an alternative and then leave, right? Yeah. Yeah, it's good stuff. It's good stuff.
Cool. My last final question, and audience members, please feel free. There's still time if anybody has any lingering questions. But are there any local or national resources you know of to help with a cannabis dependence? Somewhere to point people if they have any concerns or questions.
Yeah, there's many. I mean, we've got Bucks County Drug and Alcohol Commission for Bucks County. We have Philadelphia, the I forget their acronym.
CBHID.
Thank you. But I mean, realistically, like the one-stop shop is going to be SAMHSA, their national helpline, 1-800-662-4357. All right. I got them. I'm so dependent on this. But yeah, the SAMHSA national helpline, and that's a treatment locator. So like you just like basically type in your zip code and bam, up comes, all kinds of resources. So that's kind of like the one-stop shop. But I know Kim has some very effective ones in Montgomery County that you might want to pitch.
Yeah, I mean, Montgomery County also has stuff that same idea. But I would just like to say too that, for adolescents, the kind of not so great news is we don't get enough support from insurance companies for treatment for adolescents. We really need a lot more support there, because why on earth would we wait until they're older? And this is getting more ingrained in those the wiring in the brain. Why would we wait until we're going to wait until you're an adult so that we can treat you then when you truly have a substance use disorder? I love programs who approach this from a wellness perspective. So if I have a 15-year-old who's smoking a lot of weed, they may not need to abstain the rest of their lives. They really need to abstain until they're at least 21, better yet 25. But they might just be right at the tip of the iceberg and not going down that road yet. And to try to, get someone into treatment who is being told, this is a lifelong change that you have to make. I think there's some challenges there. But I wish there was more support for treatment of those kids. But outpatient programs, IOPs, intensive outpatient programs, are groups that meet 3 times a week. Partial hospitalization programs are around. Rebecca Bonner's on here from the Bridgeways School. So there are recovery high schools that's not treatment, but it's certainly a way to keep people connected to their peer group and help them get through those really challenging years of staying sober, in that environment, in that youthful environment. So, but there are some inpatient programs for adolescents, not nearly enough. I love going after the underlying mental health challenges because, as I said way back at the beginning, we would much rather go for the easy fix, like a drug, like technology, like whatever, to escape than doing the internal work. So any opportunity for our kids to have some therapy, I think inpatient or outpatient, is a good thing. And not to be afraid of it. Therapy is not punishment. Therapy is love. I love you so much that we are going to find a way to afford this and make sure that you get a chance to talk about what you're going through, because you may not feel comfortable talking to mom or dad. You might really need to talk to a professional. And they can
Kim, yeah, thank you so much for pointing out, coming at a 16-year-old saying you can never use a substance again in your life, and that, like identifying that, like, just because somebody is engaging in risky behavior doesn't mean that they can never do that. I think that's such an important piece. It's like, just early intervention, re-guiding. I like to look at them as like rumble strips. We can all be rumble strips on the side of the highway to keep our kids, keep the car in the lane. You can go fast again, but just be aware, Maybe you want to wait a couple years till you get the whole driving thing under your belt.
Right.
Yeah. Well said.
Yeah, well said, both of you. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Any
Oh,
last?
and I just noticed, Sean, if you're still on, Sean, and thank you. They sent a chat that I was trying to reference Harry Anslinger, Reefer Madness guy from back in the day. I totally butchered his name. So Harry Anslinger. Thank you.
Thank you for the clarification. Awesome. So if in case anyone was still interested in Kim's slides, she did put a link to them in the chat. You can go ahead and open that up there, or again, shoot me an email and I will send it to you if that's easier. The recording is available. Send me an email and I can send that over to you as well. Thank you again to Dave. Thank you to Kim. Thank you so much for joining us and your wealth of knowledge about this topic. I hope everyone learned a little something today to empower them for prevention in the future. And it seems we don't have any other last questions. So thank you all so much for joining us. And that'll conclude today's town hall.
Thanks, Shannon.
Yeah.
Great to see you, Dave.
Here, have
Thank
a
you,
good
Kim. Always a pleasure. And Shannon, thanks so much for the invite and allowing me to come into your organization's community. So
Thank you
everybody
for
stay
being here, both of you.
All right.
Bet.
Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you. Bye.